11 lenses here. There's one out on loan, so I have 12 lenses that I use pretty consistently, pretty often for specific things. In photography, photographers often say it's all about the glass. You gotta have better glass. It's not about the camera, it's about the lens, and that is absolutely true. The problem is that really good lenses cost a lot of money. So here are some lenses that don't necessarily break the bank, that I've discovered over the course of buying and selling a lot of stuff. I've been through my records. I've got 50 lenses that I can find in my records that I bought on the way to evaluating different lenses for different things and ending up with this. A caveat is that if you've bought a Nikon D3xxx series or D5xxx series, you can't use many of these, and I will create a link to I'll create a link in the comment to my video about why the Nikon D300, the D3xxx and D5xxx series are not a good idea. So I'll create that link. So here's what we've got. Let's start at the telephoto end. I'll make another video about the difference between constant aperture and variable aperture zoom lenses, but go Google that. The difference between constant aperture and variable aperture lenses, and you will see that fixed aperture lenses tend to be a better lens and a more pro lens, because the physics is harder, it's harder to make, but the bottom line is the value is a lens like that. It's constant 2.8 lens when it's zoomed in will let in four times the double the light, almost triple the light of a cheaper consumer zoom. Now triple the light is 3 stops, and that's a lot. So I'll create another video specifically about that. But as long as you have a camera like a D90 or a D80 or a D7000 or a D7100 or a D300 or a D200 or a D700 or basically any camera that has, I'm pushing a little nub here, it's like the little head of a screwdriver. That's a focus screw that means that this camera has a built-in focus motor, so you don't have to buy a lens that has a built-in focus motor. So that opens up your whole world. So here is a lens that I own. I just took it on vacation because I didn't want to take that, but it's actually almost the same lens. Optics aren't quite up to the quality. That's a 70 to 210 constant f4 lens, as opposed to a 80 to 200. 80 to 200, so it even has a little bit more range. f2.8. Now that lens is an absolute beast. That lens is astonishing. It's still available today. It's from 90s. Did it start in the 90s? It's the twin ring version of that series. So the newest one is the VR2 70 to 200 or 70 to 210. It's $2,500 or something. But there's still a big following for this lens. It's still available today. It's because it's more optically simple than the newer lens and the VR, and because it's driven by the focus in the camera, there are advantages to this. Personally, I prefer this over the VR2 lens. This cost me $350, although it needed some love. They're kind of, you can pick them up for $550 all day long. That lens, you will never regret buying that lens. That lens is absolutely astonishing. There are so many times that I will take that lens on my full frame body, and that is it. Apart from maybe a wide angle lens or the 50mm in my pocket, because that lens is astonishing. So that lens, how much is let's see, how much is a consumer Nikon 55 to 200, say, new? That is, it's only $50 used. That's because it's junk. Like a 20 or 55 to 300, which is a bit more reach. $225. But it does not compare, not even a little bit. So the new version of this, I think 70 to 200, 2.8 Nikon, $2,000, $2,000 for the newer one, and I actually prefer this. I genuinely prefer this. I prefer the coloring. It's built like a tank. I like it. So, talking maybe say 450 to 600 for the twin ring version of that. That I got for $80. And I would rather have that all day long than any of the newer, even VR zooms. All day long, I would prefer that lens. Going off telephotos, there's an interesting little lens. It's one of the few variable aperture lenses I have. It's a 28 to 105 f3.5 to 4.5D, and the reason I've kept it is actually the reason I've kept it is because I want to play around. I want to take it out for a day with my Nikon D3 and only that lens and see if I use it, and if I don't, I'll sell it. But it's actually really, really good macro lens, and I think optically I find that better than the Nikon consumer lenses for sure. And 28 to 105 is in pretty nice range with a full frame camera. So, but that one's on the fence. If I take that out and use it and don't love the results and then don't find myself grabbing it and putting it in my camera bag, then it's going. It's about $125 used. But again, much better than consumer modern zooms. I'm going to stick with zooms though. The mid-range zoom, that is there's a D version of this too. I don't know how focus. Shooting this on a crappy lens of a phone, which is kind of ironic. That's a constant f2.8 35 to 70 millimeter. There's also a D version. I got that for $280, I think. They're around 300 used. That is a really, really good lens. Again, better than consumer for that kind of money. That's a pro lens. It's older. This could be from the late 80s, from film cameras. Could be as old as the 80s. That's a really good lens. So, general just walking around lenses. If I was going out with my D3S, which I probably won't because it's so heavy. So that's the disadvantage of that camera. But if I'm just going out for some walking around, right now, if I was leaving the house, I would either have that on it or that on it if I was using a zoom. So either that zoom that I'm thinking about or the 35 to 70. The only newer consumer zoom I have is the 18 to 35 millimeter 3.5 to 4.5 G. So that's a full frame lens. It was $600 or something. It's around $600 mark. Super hard to find used. I actually bought it new, but it was a really decent price because they're just not available. Just not available used. And I had a Samyang 14mm manual focus lens. I just wasn't using it, and I felt I need a wide angle zoom, but actually I don't. I hardly use it. So right now I'm experimenting with this 20mm f4 manual focus. If I grab that more than I grab that, then I'm going to sell them both. So probably $550 because they're just not. They don't come up used. 500, at least 500. 200 for that. So that's $700. I'll spend maybe $300 on the 20mm f2.8D lens. So I'll have an extra few $100 to spend on other stuff in my pocket. So yeah, I don't really use that, but it is an exceptional lens. It's exceptionally sharp. I I just don't do the ultra wide thing very often anymore. And because it's variable aperture at 35mm, it's an f4.5, and that's the depth. That's just not. I'm kind of a depth of field, big aperture kind of guy. So what else? Portraits. Everybody, if you do portraits, generally the pro choice is between 85mm or using the 80-200 zoom. This 85mm is available in a 1.8 and a 1.4. I haven't owned the 1.4. This is the G. I haven't owned the 1.4. I don't. It's so much more money for just a little bit more aperture. I can't pull the trigger on that. That is considerably better though than the 85mm 1.8D, its predecessor, which I had, and I've done side by side. I've used them, and this is definitely better. Definitely worth the money. So of my fixed lenses, let's pull them out. Apart from macro, I've got the 85, I've got the 50, I got the 35, which is on loan right now, but it's only for my crop sensor, the DX camera. I have a D70-100. Then I've got a bunch of stuff that's sitting out in my vintage collection, but manual focus, at 20mm, I do use, and it's very, very usable. So those are the kind of primes that I have. The 50mm, that on a full frame camera is pretty much the same view as your eye sees. So very often, if I'm taking out a full frame camera, I will just take that on, just walking around, just take that. I'm actually more likely to do that than taking any of the zooms. So what we got left? Then macro. I do a lot of macro photography, and it's as much to sell stuff on eBay as being artistic. But 2 lenses. This is I just sold my 55mm manual focus lens, which is insanely good. But I never use it because I've got this. So this was replaced. This is the 60mm D. That focus kind of sucks. This has been replaced by the G version, which is not even close to as good. So as long as you have a camera with a focus motor, you can buy the 60mm f1.8D Nikon Micro, which is their word for macro. That is a really, really, really good lens. Better than the G. So maybe 250, 300 used. Better than the G. And then I picked this up on a whim. Also macro. This is the equivalent. So Nikon have a 105mm f2.8 lens, and it's insanely expensive. This is a Tokina 100mm f2.8 lens, and side by side, I can't tell the difference. I mean, this lens is really an astonishing Tokina. This is kind of a secret, brilliant lens. Again, used around $300. If you're using a crop sensor camera, that is it's a little bit too telephoto, maybe even for macro. But on a fixed frame camera, those 2 lenses, the 60 and the 100, just really, really, really good job. I think that's about it. I mean, so for travel, if I'm traveling light, I will probably take Nikon D70-100 crop sensor camera. I'll take that as my telephoto, and I'll take the 35-70. If I'm doing sports, that all day long, and either the 20mm wide angle or the 50mm just for anything else that might come up. If I'm doing portraits, if I'm doing studio kind of portraits, or if I'm doing shooting the kids or anything, it's going to be between the 85mm or the zoom. if I don't know. I can't think of a reason for this 28 to 105. I want to keep it because it's it's just so good, but actually that should go. That should go. Have I talked about that? That's just fun. 600 mm fixed f2.8 mirror lens. It's old. It's by Sigma, Vivitar, various people kind of brand the same thing. If you're shooting the moon, you want that. I don't really can't think of any other thing I would want to use it for. Maybe if I was at an air show or something. Yeah, if I was an air show, I'd take that. 600 mm is a long way, and it's actually optically pretty good. And because it's got the mirror, it's very compact. Other bits and pieces, those are extension tubes for macro that I don't really use because I have bellows as well, and that kind of tiny macro lens shooting, I just don't have the patience for it. I don't find it that fun. And then something I've got and don't really use is a 1.4x teleconverter. It is a Kenko, which is said to be good. I haven't compared a whole bunch. But that's supposed to be good. That would mate to that. I can't see any other lens I would want to mate that to. Don't see any logic. Possibly, just for fun, that 600, turn that into a 1200. Although at 1200, I don't even think my best tripod would not jiggle somewhat at 1200 mil. I don't know. I'll have to play. Next time there's a good moon, I'll play. In terms of what I compared this to, like I said, any of these older f2.8 lenses stuff the modern kit lenses and Nikon consumer zooms. They just stuff them. Like it's very popular for people to buy something like a 28 to 300. That's doing everything. From 28 to 300 is kind of that plus a little bit on the low end. So that and a combination of a little bit of that, all the way through that, with that connected. How is one cheap lens, and they're not exactly cheap, but optically the physics, it's impossible to do a good job of all of that in a consumer lens. It's just ridiculous. So don't buy that kind of lens. It's just dumb. In comparison, so here's where my dilemma is right now. So I do use the range of the 35 to 70. I do use this lens quite a lot. It's really not as good as the Nikon 24 to 80. 2.8. But that lens is, really, it's $2,400 new. I bet they don't come up on eBay very much. Maybe I could get one for $1,750, $1,800. Oh, that's a lot of money. But I would like that lens because I could sell. I could let that go. The ultra wide lens, so that's $500. The 2.8 35 to 70 I'd let go. I definitely let that go. That's another 100. Hang on, this might lead to an eBay thing this afternoon. What else would I let go for that? I could probably keep the 20mm prime just for a little bit wider, but that's so I could get 500, 800, 950. I could probably get $1,000 out of those three lens, and would be happy to not have and spend another $700 and have that Nikon 24 to 70. Oof, that's tempting. That might happen, but that's the way I think. That's the way I think. I don't think of so much of buying lenses. I think of, say, if I look up on my records, that probably paid $280 for that, $260 or $280. I bet if I photographed that magically, in the studio, I can sell it for $320. So even after eBay fees, I'll make a bit of money on it. Even more so when I buy, like if I buy an old, like I probably bought an old film camera for half nothing, like $50 or something, that somebody didn't realize that this was a good lens that was selling with it. So I do that a lot too. So I don't really care about spending hundreds of money on stuff because I usually do it in a way that it costs me just a fraction of that. So anyway, that's a ramble about some lenses that I think are really great, that I highly recommend for specific things. In terms of philosophy, I think that's a really good philosophy too. I can spiral into wanting to buy everything I might possibly need. With eBay being so fast in delivery, with so much stuff being available, with Amazon Prime, shoot. Just go out and shoot. Just go out and use equipment and work out what you're lacking. Work out what you actually need and buy to fill the holes. If you want to know what fills a hole really cheaply, let me know. I'd be happy to help.